Welcome back, guys. JLand Bio here. Today we are going to talk a little bit about how organisms interact with one another. We'll also talk about the process of succession and biomes. So a lot of different aspects to ecology that we're going to be taking a look at today, but we're going to go ahead and dive on in. So hopefully by the end of this video you should be able to differentiate between an organism's habitat and niche. You should also be able to explain the different type of interactions between different species, as well as evaluate the difference between primary and secondary succession. We have quite a few key vocabulary terms here, including habitat, niche, competition, predation, mutualism, commensalism, succession, primary succession, pioneer species, secondary succession, and climax community. So let's talk a little bit about a really key concept related to ecology, and that is the concept of habitat versus niche. A habitat is very straightforward. It's where an organism lives. So if we take a look on the right-hand side here, we have a nice spruce tree. That is the habitat for all of these different warblers, the Cape May warbler, the bay-breasted warbler, and the yellow-rumped warbler. But the niche is kind of its role in its environment and is based on what it eats. So the niche is what an organism does in its environment. That includes things like what it eats, how it functions in its environment, a variety of different things, where it obtains water. So you can see that all three of these warblers occupy different niches in their environment. The example here is that the Cape May warbler feeds at the tips of the branches near the top of the tree. The bay-breasted warbler feeds in the middle part of the tree, and the yellow-rumped warbler feeds in the lower part of the tree. So they all may have the same habitat, but occupy different niches. The reason that this works is because if you have two organisms that occupy the same niche, they become in direct competition with one another. And in competition, there'll be a winner and a loser. The winner lives, and the loser dies. So in this instance, they can occupy the same general area, but because they feed on different food, maybe they reproduce at different times, those are things that are included in a niche, per se. So let's talk a little bit about some different relationships that exist between organisms. All the relationships we're going to look at are what are known as symbiotic relationships. And those are just simply relationships that exist between different organisms. So one of them we're going to look at is what's called mutualism. And mutualism is a symbiotic relationship where both organisms benefit. So the example here is the clownfish and the sea anemone. The clownfish are provided with protection because the anemone is actually poisonous to a lot of predators of the anemone, of the clownfish. And so the clownfish are immune to that. So the clownfish can live in the anemone and get protection from that. When the clownfish bring back food, sometimes little bits and shards of food are taken and sometimes little bits of food are left behind. When they are left behind, the anemone gets a free meal. So both organisms benefit from that type of symbiotic relationship. Another one we're going to take a look at is commensalism. Commensalism is where one organism benefits, but the other organism really neither benefits nor suffers in the relationship. The example here is the shark and the zebrafish. The shark does not benefit nor suffer from this. The zebrafish follow around the shark, hoping to get little bits of food that are left behind after a shark has its meal. So the zebrafish benefit. The shark neither really benefits nor suffers from that particular relationship. And the last one is parasitism. Parasitism is where one organism benefits but the other one suffers. Things like ticks are considered parasitic. They're parasites. You've probably heard that term before. The tick benefits and the individual who has the tick suffers. Now in parasitism, they don't want the organism to die. That would actually be a bad thing. If the organism dies, then the parasite won't have anything to feed off of anymore. You can see the fish down here on the right, there's actually a parasite that's attached to the fish's tongue that eats and ingests the food that the fish eats. So that is another example of parasitism. So you have three key relationships between organisms. Another one that we'd like to discuss is predation, which is not really listed here. But predation is the act of one organism eating another in order to survive. And we've seen those in food webs and food chains already in this unit. So let's talk about an ecosystem and how an ecosystem grows. The process of generating and creating an ecosystem is known as succession. It's the gradual process of change in an ecosystem over time. The process of succession is different for different communities and ecosystem. So let's talk a little bit about how an ecosystem actually develops over time. That is the process of succession, or the gradual process of change in an ecosystem over time. Now, different Succession is different for different communities and ecosystems. So the different species that will exist there, they may be different in different ecosystems. But what typically happens is you start off as bare ground, and then you start getting grasses and ferns and things like that. There are shrubs that are produced, and then young forests, and then a mature forest. So these things kind of progress very, very carefully over time. Now, the very first species that starts the process of succession is known as a pioneer species. And again, that differs based on the different environments and the different communities and ecosystems that exist around the world. But the process is pretty much the same. Now, primary succession occurs on new land. New land is kind of hard to get and can be kind of hard to find. Usually this occurs after a glacier or some type of volcanic eruption to create new land that creates things like bare rock. The other thing is that when we're done with the process of succession, that is known as the climax community. The climax community is the end of succession, the community at the end of succession. So when you think of a desert, that's what a desert looks like. Or when you think of a forest, that's what a forest looks like. Do keep in mind that just because once it has reached a climax community doesn't mean that things don't change. Things change all the time. It's just that it's going to be a more stable environment than a community that is going through the process of succession. Now let's take a look at secondary succession. Secondary succession usually occurs after a natural disaster such as a forest fire. Now what's nice about secondary succession is that it actually occurs much faster than primary succession. The reason for this being is that there's already soil that's present, and since there's already soil, things are going to be able to grow and develop faster than in primary succession, where we have new rocks, where we have to actually go through and develop the soil for the plants and things to exist. So secondary succession happens much, much faster than primary succession. The last thing we're going to look at today are biomes, and so these are all of the different climax communities that exist around the globe. For example, a desert. Desert has very specific organisms that live in it. Same with a tundra, temperate forest, tropical rainforest. All of these systems are very similar across the globe regardless of the geography. So a temperate a temperate forest in the eastern part of the United States is going to look very similar to that of Northern Europe. Let's go ahead and make biomes the word of the video for today. Biomes. So again, biomes is the word of the video. So hopefully you get a good idea of the difference between habitat and niche. Keep in mind that organisms that share the same niche are in direct competition, which creates a winner and a loser. The winners live and the losers die. Organisms interact with each other in a variety of ways, including mutualism, commensalism, parasitism, etc. Succession occurs in order to reach a climax community, and these climax communities look different based on the temperature and precipitation that exists in a given area. So hopefully you got a lot out of this video. Again, we will take a look and go in a little more detail in class, and we will talk to you guys next time. Have a great day, guys. Bye-bye.